Coming up on That Was a Show, Ned and Stacey was a show. He's a fast-talking ad exec with no scruples. She's a down-on-her-luck journalist stuck living with her parents. To get a promotion, he needs a wife. To get on with her life, she needs an apartment. What if they got married? So what if they completely hate each other? Join Brynn, Aaron, and Barry as they will they won't they through another rom-com.
We grew up during peak sitcom, Seinfeld, Friends, The Fresh Prince. But those shows were diamonds in the rough. This podcast is not about those diamonds. It's about the rough. Some sitcoms were briefly popular in their time. Some were canceled almost immediately. You probably won't recognize most of these, and you'll ask, that was a show?
That was a show?
The podcast about failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, starring
Brynn Byrne,
Aaron Yeger,
and Andrew Helmer as Barry.
a Radio Gizmo production. Hey, everybody. We're back.
Yes, we are. Although I guess it's more easy to say I'm back because you guys did an episode without me there. So I'm back.
Yes.
Barry's here, everyone. Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry, guys. There's not like this secretive rift happening where, Barry's gonna leave and then we're gonna pretend that he was never here at all. And
Oh man, you guys have thought about this.
Anyway, the train is back on the tracks. Although it was fun doing that bonus episode talking about the nanny and the chatterbox and all of that.
Yeah.
But
I didn't even know that had a spinoff or backdoor pilot or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it was, as I said over and over again in the episode, it was something that like haunted me as like a kid. So I had to kind of really explore it.
it was her John Larroquette show.
Yeah.
Also, in fun thing, just in researching this show, so obviously, Thomas Haden Church out of Wings there. I didn't realize that Wings took place in the Cheers universe.
Oh, I didn't remember that, but now that you mention it, it rings a bell.
So it's like the third show, or it's the second show in the Cheers universe.
Oh.
And it was the same creators as Frasier.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I guess we should actually explain why we brought up Wings and Thomas Haden Church.
It's always a good time to talk about Wings. Come on.
Right.
Yeah, so this week we talked about Ned and Stacey. And Ned and Stacey starred Thomas Haden Church, who was fresh off his time from Wings, and Debra Messing, who this is her second major role. After, like, her first one, she did a bit of a turn as Keanu Reeves' unfaithful wife in A Walk in the Clouds, if anybody remembers that.
I do not.
And basically, like, she has, like, a smallish role in that. And, like, this just sort of, they were like, let's get her on TV. The show was created by Michael J. Wethern. This high-concept, low-stakes show lasted for 2 seasons on NBC between 95 and 97. It co-starred Nadia Dajani as Stacey's sister Amanda, and Greg Gertman as Eric, Amanda's husband and Ned's best friend. So that's essentially it. I guess I'll talk about the pilot and then we can all just rant for about, 48 minutes. So in the pilot, we're introduced to both Ned and Stacey pretty quickly, pretty efficiently, I would say.
Yeah.
Stacey's been left at the altar and she's scrambling the classifieds looking for new apartments. Ned approaches her at the bar and he very quickly directs her to the obituaries as an easier place to start looking. She's at the bar unwillingly on a blind double date with her sister and brother-in-law, and surprise, surprise, Ned's the other party. Over the course of dinner, Ned makes a general ass of himself, causing Stacey to storm out after an impassioned rant about, inner beauty and what really matters in life. And that's the end of the blind date. we see a series of scenes where Stacey kind of laments her home life. She's stuck living with her parents who are driving her absolutely up the wall. She's really struggling to find an apartment. And then we kind of cut back and forth between that and Ned, who, after being very excited for like being a shoo-in for a promotion, he gets passed over for being not married. Because this is the 1950s.
Yeah, apparently.
Gotta be a good company man.
Yeah, right? Like, I'm like, this is the early 90s. No way that would have been a thing. I mean,
yeah,
they might have passed over him if he was married.
It was a thing for the writers, like their generation.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. So like, Ned, very, quick on his feet. He instantly tells his boss, well, I'm getting married next week. So of course he has to immediately go to work to find the future ex Mrs. Ned. So, he's going through his Rolodex, calling every woman that he knows, basically proposing over the phone. And kind of interestingly, the show does not have him approach Stacey. Like, immediately you think, okay, well, he'll just call Stacey and we'll get there. No. They actually let Stacey comes to him because after she sees a commercial that he did for underwear, noticing that he has stolen her rant from the date, she goes enraged to his apartment to kind of, give him what for. It's only after she starts looking around and gets starry-eyed for his apartment, and after, he lets her in on his scheme that he's up to, she suggests it. So she's the one who kind of talks her way into this. And then, begrudgingly, they come to an arrangement. They get fake married for a period of 2 years. But
don't they get really married?
Yeah. But I mean, fake married. They're married. They get married. But I mean, they're fake married as in they don't like each other. And he doesn't. He's very upfront with her that this will be a separate lifestyle arrangement. Like, they're only there to basically, she's there to be on paper his wife and to go to dinners and stuff like that. But they will be able to live separately completely. They're allowed to date, all that fun stuff. And then a whirlwind week later, they're married and they're stuck with each other. The show takes absolutely forever to get there, but that's the concept.
Yeah.
And kind of an interesting twist on the will they, won't they. The series starts with them together and basically counting the days to their future divorce.
So, this show sets us up for an obvious Odd Couple type of scenario. And very close to the actual Odd Couple in the sense that they're literally living together.
Yes.
But this,
and I believe they had a strange marital arrangement as well.
And this immediately reminded me, from the get-go on their date. Of our recent episode, Hudson Street.
Yeah,
it did.
Aaron and I both looked at each other. We ended up watching it together, and we looked at each other like, ugh, this is like Hudson Street
Another
again.
Hudson Street. Now,
but it wasn't.
It wasn't.
Ultimately, spoiler alert, it's not the same show.
No, but
no.
That one dynamic is similar in that he's a ruthless capitalist, and
she's she is a journalist, like the woman in Hudson Street.
Is. She's the cub reporter, as Aaron
she's the
said last
lefty
time.
liberal journalist. But what was kind of funny is they make it very explicit, and she's like, "Let me guess, you're right wing and I'm left wing." Like they kind of make a joke about it.
Yeah,
and his response to that, I have to say, was kind of so he says, "Actually, I'm wingless." And I'm like, is that a joke about him coming off the show Wings? I really want it to be. If that's a really kind of inside joke about this is his first role since Wings, I strongly applaud that little meta joke. Because they slipped it in real.
It works. It works both ways. It's a clever line on its own. Well, but now that you mention it, I feel like they had to work their way into that joke. So you're right. It probably is that. Yeah,
I mean, and I think it's actually a better choice to kind of make him this apolitical guy that doesn't really care about anything, but making money. He's kind of just a bro-y kind of
he cares about his career advancement. He doesn't care about politics, and he doesn't even like necessarily disparage any of the things she says as much as just he's ambivalent to it. Like it just bores him to hear her rant about stuff, but like he doesn't say you're wrong. He's just like, I'm not interested.
He clearly thought what she had to say was interesting because it's a very clever.
But he steals it word for word and puts it in a commercial.
Yeah.
Because what matters is what's underneath. And I love the dad watching the commercial for the underwear and like him using the line, what matters is what's underneath. And the dad going, eh. That was my reaction too.
And then he asks the mom to order him some at the store.
And by the mom and dad, we mean Stacey's parents.
Yeah.
Because
Stacey's parents,
Yeah, because she watches that commercial while like sitting in misery on the couch with her parents, watching television. And I have to say, I found the whole thing of her like living at home and like struggling to find an affordable place like very relevant. Like,
yeah.
You know, there's like lots of people. Yeah, it's like, it's funny because I'm like, really? In the 90s? Because everything was thriving in the 90s.
I also have to say, I really applaud.
But it's relatable for now because there's so many, it's not affordable anywhere, especially in big cities.
Even I applaud some of those details that they picked up on. Like, for instance, he has a sick pad, right?
Yeah.
But it's rent controlled. And it's like
they called it out.
Even he
explicitly described how it all works.
Yes,
which has to be like a fuck you to Friends because like
yeah, exactly, because he's like an advertising executive, but like kind of mid-level, not like super high up.
Yeah, he's trying to go up the ladder more,
and so. It's they say specifically how much he spends in rent, and it's a realistic amount. And the fact that his apartment is this nice is because he managed to scam a rent-controlled apartment, and they have a whole joke about that. And I also applaud how it's a nice apartment with a great view and all of that, and it's pretty big for Manhattan. Yeah. But the decor is what a 30-something guy who's really just focused on his career and doesn't have some amazing personal decorator. Like, it's not...
but then he hires one.
Yeah, but it's like, it's a relatively... It's like slightly cluttered, kind of sparse, relatively realistically decorated. You know, there's a couple expensive pieces of furniture, but they're not like... so specifically calling attention to themselves. Like, it's just, and even her parents' house is like a very like average middle class.
I have to say, I
house
think
that they would live in.
The overall production design, costume design, everything was like top notch.
Yeah.
Like,
it was.
I was like obsessed with like the fashions, like because you know you watch some of these old shows and it's like ugh, like just. Like what they're wearing and their hairstyles, but everything I was like, ooh, this is like very tasteful 1990s. Yes. Like this is like the upper echelon of like, you know, like style and like, you know, I was like, oh, and it's all like you said, realistic for their income levels and their social status. Yes. Like none of it seemed, you know, cartoonish or anything. I was like very impressed.
Except that I couldn't stand looking at his suit, and it's not because of any mistake they made.
So big.
It was absolutely...
It was a boxy 90s suit.
Yeah, it was absolutely realistic. It is exactly what that guy would be wearing. Yeah. But those double-breasted mid-90s suits that look like they're 2 sizes too big, and he's just swimming in it as if he's wearing like a kid wearing his dad's suit. And I'm like,
it looks like She-Hulk.
He's not a small dude, and I'm just like, this suit is not doing him any favors.
You've had this rant multiple
so many times
on this podcast. It's about television, not about.
I know, but those, but in 90s sitcoms, there's almost always
a trope at this point.
It's a trope. There's almost always a character who wears a suit.
Is it a trope, or is it just the way people dressed in 1995?
It was. Now
it's a trope for our podcast talking about this.
Aaron ranting about it is
a trope for me.
It's an Aaron trope.
A trope that was in the show was the called off wedding trope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's always a called off wedding that kicks off.
It's such a lazy, quick way to establish a character as down on their luck.
Yeah.
Like.
So Debra Messing's character, Stacey, it's like, you know, during an expository kind of thing at the beginning. They talk about how she was left at the altar, basically. And that's why she's down on her luck. That's why she's kind of stuck living at mom and dad's house. And, why she has like sort of complicated, feelings about dating again and getting married. And then she ends up in this like weird fake marriage. And she's obviously, as soon as it happens, she's like, as soon as they go through with it, she kind of is like immediately in regret and devastated by her decision.
It serves as a veritable Chekhov's gun for the decision to then get married as the premise for the show. But it's just such a lazy trope.
So I mentioned just in passing to you guys when we were out the other night. I wasn't crazy about this pilot. Like I thought it worked very functional, but it was just I'm there's too much story and like it didn't get me into what the show was going to be like because yes, but I ended up watching more of it like outside of the Mr. Belvedere episode that we'll talk about. I watched more of it because I was sort of curious how the story went from that first episode. So I watched like episodes 2 and 3 and it's like kind of lightly serialized. Like it picks up like on their, right after their wedding and all that. And it is interesting because the show really doesn't, at least in the episodes that I was watching, in no way does it broach romantic tension between them. And within an episode or two, they get along really well, but they're clearly just friends. And like, it becomes an interesting little hangout show about like these very mid 90s, like these kind of amoral characters where like he's outwardly a piece of shit, but like she's also quite materialistic and like she also doesn't really give a shit about lying or anything like that. So it's interesting because it reminds me a little of these like kind of this narcissistic thing that was, Seinfeld's got it. Will and Grace has it. Not so much Friends, because Friends, they tried to pretend like they were like they had morals.
Frasier has it in a very different way. In a different way.
It traffics in like, and I think, and you see a lot of this to this day, right? Where it's fun to watch kind of shitty people kind of be shitty.
Yeah. The 90s explored the idea of people's baser self-interests in an interesting way. Whereas previous eras, everything always had to be about something. There always had to be a moral at the end that wrapped up in a neat little package, even right up into the
tedious moralizing.
Yes, even up to the late 80s.
Nice.
That's an Easter egg for any longtime listeners.
Yeah, we're not even going to say where that's from. You'll know. Even up to the like late 80s, early 90s, there was still the implication that there had to be some sort of moral core, and of course, like Married with Children didn't, but that's because it was a show that was specifically commenting on it and purposefully doing the exact opposite. But like, it was not the norm. And then by 93, something like that, suddenly you have this flood of shows that are all just exploring this idea of like, what if we just tell stories about like average people doing the shit that they actually just want to do day to day? There isn't a bigger point or message to it. And it's just how they navigate the actual annoyances of the world. And like Seinfeld, of course, takes this to its foreseeable conclusion. But this show, like you said, like the pilot, I wasn't that hooked by the pilot. It didn't like bother me that much because it moved quickly. Like it was a pretty well-paced episode. So it was like easy to watch. Yeah. But based on that alone, I wouldn't have watched more. After we watched the other episode, Brynn and I watched that one together, and both of us were like, I would watch more of this show. Based on this.
Yeah, and spoiler alert. We enjoyed it and found it very funny.
I knew you guys would. I gave Aaron a little spoiler the other night where I said like it might be the second episode that we watched of this might be one of my favorite shows we've watched. Like not this like one of the favorite episodes of anything we've watched because I found myself like just laughing out loud on many occasions. And like having known Brynn for as long as I did, I was like, oh, this is going to tickle Brynn. Like all of this, like we used to make a lot of old, for some reason in our early 20s, we made a lot of references to Mr. Belvedere. So like,
which is wild because it's totally like not.
I watched it a lot growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch it that much because it wasn't one of those ones that I caught on reruns. But yeah, like just like the idea of Mr. Belvedere was always very.
I didn't watch it at all, but I recognized him.
But
You get a good. The show does. Okay, so we'll. You know what? Fuck it. We'll just talk about the second episode so we can.
let's get into it.
I do want to say, I just as a tease to that, this might be the first time where the amount of notes that I wrote for the second episode exceeds the amount that I wrote for the first. Because there was just so much more to say, and they're not like usual where it's a bunch of nitpicking over things that bothered me. It's actually just like a lot of fun observations because it was actually like an extremely entertaining half hour.
Very clever. Like, I mean, clever and silly. And like, if you watch the pilot and then you watch this episode, it doesn't... you can tell it's the same show, but it's like not the same tone whatsoever. And I feel like the pilot doesn't do justice to what they eventually did with it,
Yeah. This is okay. So the next episode we watch is in like the middle of the second season. Story-wise, Ned and Stacey are nearly through with their divorce proceedings. So clearly like that storyline has been playing out, but it's like you can see how they've actually managed to become pretty good friends. They're not really foils for each other anymore. But this episode backburners that relationship and instead kind of focuses on an adventure in Ned's career. And I just sort of skimmed some of the things, and it looks like every now and then the show would go to this well where it would be like, okay, well, Ned's in advertising. We can do some fun stuff with that. So we open on Ned and Eric watching an old episode of Mr. Belvedere. And
I'm already chuckling.
Exactly. And it's funny because like they intentionally choose like a pretty problematic scene from the show, which I think
quite problematic.
I feel like the show is just like being like, man, what a weird show that was. So it's interesting that they choose that. And we find out that like Ned is putting together this passion project for his latest commercial. Like he's obsessed with Mr. Belvedere, which is very funny.
And random.
And very random, especially because it's all about moralizing and Ned is just a piece of shit. So it's really funny that like he really is attached to the show. And then we find out that Stacey's really into the show too. And like, and all of them, like the only one who doesn't like Mr. Belvedere is Stacey's sister Amanda. Yeah.
She's a funny character, by the way.
She is. So Ned's gonna get Mr. Belvedere, of course, once again played by Christopher Hewitt from the 1980s sitcom Mr. Belvedere. Very funny is only once does anybody even make reference
to his real name,
actual name.
Or the idea that
him Mr. Belvedere.
Everybody calls him Mr. Belvedere. And they're gonna get him to sell cappuccino in a can. And very soon, like
why
Ned
not a cleaning product. Like,
I know, it's great. It's like clearly a product that Mr. Belvedere wouldn't be
interested in.
He's shoehorning Mr. Belvedere into a commercial where it doesn't even make sense just because he wanted an excuse to meet this guy that he liked from his childhood.
We need to go back to that opening scene.
So they show up Ned and Eric show up at Mr. Belvedere's apartment, and I'm also only going to be calling him Mr. Belvedere. I need to stress once again that he is not playing Mr. Belvedere in this episode. He is playing actor Christopher Hewitt, who used to play Mr. Belvedere,
but they only talk to as Mr. Belvedere.
So they show up at his apartment, and it's just full of old toasters and new toasters, and he has like a side business like hawking toasters.
And he makes a reference that he's like, he offers the guy a free like toaster oven, and he's like, "Don't worry, I've filed off the serial number," or something like that. So they're like gray market or possibly stolen small kitchen appliances.
Guys, isn't the implication that he like licensed those? Like it's like the George Foreman grill.
I don't think it is.
I think it is because there was a joke about how your toaster ovens like burnt down an apartment or something. There was like something. So is it his branding? Or is he just hawking stolen?
Maybe, but either way, the implication is he is very washed up. This
Yeah.
apartment is not. It's a small apartment.
Yeah.
A good
It's-
50% of the
He's-
floor space is toasters.
He's clearly a little unhinged, and like
yeah.
all the
And I
props,
mean, what a
all
good
the props to
sport.
Christopher,
Yeah.
all the props to Christopher Hewitt for
Yeah.
reading this script
Yes.
and like getting the joke.
Yeah,
And,
like getting
just-
the joke and running with it in such
Yeah.
a hilarious way.
Yeah. I'm gonna-
He plays such a huckster version of like a washed up actor, and he's just trying to like scam his way through life.
Yeah.
And he gets talked into doing the commercial, and it's great because he just goes to his closet and he has one single Mr. Belvedere sweater hanging in the closet,
Like sweater,
like,
tie, pants, like all just ready to go.
and then he puts it on and he's just in it for the rest of the episode. Like
yeah,
he
he's
doesn't
just in
change.
character.
Oh man.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, but you have to. Okay, so we have there's some funny things we need to like talk about this in more detail because
Yeah.
So that very first opening scene where we're like, it's like revealed that like Ned is like obsessed with Mr. Belvedere. Like he and Rico are watching the problematic episode. And they're like breaking it down and analyzing it in a way that like no one has ever analyzed that
Yeah.
show.
Like it's a film theory class. Like
unless they were us.
yeah, but it
Yeah.
was they were talking about it as if they're like doing a master's thesis on this.
Yeah, he describes he describes the conversation that Mr. Belvedere is having with this kid as like a series of Socratic questions.
Yes. Yeah. Like, do you see how he doesn't actually like just immediately give the advice? He structures it by asking questions, and he's like explains the whole concept of why he thinks it's a
like,
winning
oh,
character.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
And they're making notes and
yeah. And
Oh my
then
God.
okay, and then again when he shows up at Mr. Belvedere, quote unquote's apartment, he also convinces him by saying that they'll go with their other choice, Tony Danza.
yeah.
And then the implication is that Tony Danza is his like nemesis.
Yeah, he's super jealous. And immediately you see his face change. Like the idea that Tony Danza might get this role instead of him. He's just like, no, I'm in. Like,
and that's
screw that
when
guy.
he takes out the Mr. Belvedere getup from the closet.
And by the way,
doesn't he just go Danza?
Danza. Apologies to our audience for, I think this is the third time in a row that Tony Danza is working his way into
Why would
an
you
episode of our
apologize for
show.
that? Everyone loves Tony Danza. We just don't like some of the characters
No, I
he
know.
plays.
I love him too. I'm just
We love
saying.
Danza.
This wasn't some grand scheme of ours. This is actually unfolding organically.
It is. As is like the chaotic way in which we're talking about this. Because I think that you can tell that we actually like the show and are excited to talk about it when we get really chaotic and loud and we're talking over each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if it's like either way. It's like if we really didn't like it or if we like loved it and we're just
Yeah. We can't if we have like medium energy, you can tell that it was just another episode of something.
yeah.
But this is one of those things where like I'm just so glad that I watched this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one stands out as a discovery. And
Yeah.
I actually I decided to watch a third episode that I picked at random, something in between the two, just to see like at what point does this show get funny. And I went a little earlier, like I watched episode 6 of the first season.
Yeah.
And it was good. It wasn't as good as the season 2 episode 10 one,
No.
but it was evolved noticeably from the pilot. Like it does give a flavor of what eventually makes this show funny. It was very like, I'm not going to go into all sorts of detail explaining the plot.
We have to get back to episode 10.
I know. I'm not going to go into a whole thing about explaining the plot. I'm just going to say like the Thomas Haden Church Debra Messing thing, they can carry a show. There's no question about it.
Well, they're superstars. Everybody in it is like iconic. Like they're
It's
all successful actors.
It's so interesting to see because I assumed that maybe Debra Messing had been on something before this and that she was coming off of like, or even like, I was like, well, maybe she did her Seinfeld appearance before this because she's very unfunny. Yeah, but it's after.
Wow.
This really like she had done like one or two things on like She had like a spot on NYPD Blue in one episode. And then she did this Keanu Reeves movie, and they were like, yeah, let's get her something. And like, this is her first star. And she's just like lights up the screen. Like I always appreciated more than liked Will and Grace.
Yeah.
It wasn't really something I've seen a lot of, but every time I did, the one thing you would always note is like, these are just 4 magnificent performers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So like seeing her like just as good here, it was awesome.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I just want to jump in real quick and talk about like, and I apologize for not having a good source on this available, but I did read, I can't remember if I read an article or I remember her talking about this on a podcast, but Debra Messing was like, you know, looking back on her career and like the beginning of her career specifically, and like her going into sitcoms was a pivot for her. Like it was like she was trying to be like an ingenue. Like she was trying to be in movies like Walk in the Clouds. And she had a couple of experiences actually that were like not pleasant and she didn't enjoy it. And it was kind of one of these things where she kind of made a decision to like move more into the like TV comedy space. And like, honestly, like, I think that was like the best decision. Like, I think she's like one of these rare performers who's like similar to the Friends cast in that like, there's just like, she just has a talent for timing and like, you know, like she has the right stuff for that kind of delivery.
If this is her first role like this, which it didn't even occur to me that it was, like when I watched this, even from the pilot, which overall fell kind of flat in terms of not being super entertaining, immediately from her first scene, I just assumed she must have been in like 7 shows. Like just like her level of professionalism in comedy, like as presenting comedy, like the energy that she puts into the dialogue. I'm like, you've clearly done hundreds of episodes of television if you're just hitting the ground running like this.
If you're this good. If you're going toe to toe with Thomas Hayden Church, who's coming off of 6 years off Wings, right? Like,
I haven't seen this since watching a couple of the failed shows with Jennifer Aniston that we've reviewed. Where I'm just like,
this kid's got it.
Yeah, like no matter what you say about those shows, you can see from minute 1 that like, oh, clearly she's going to be a star. They just need to find the right project for her. This was like that sort of situation where it's just like, oh, there's no question she's like already superstar.
And seeing that the show progresses to be a lot better than it starts, like, it was a great project for her. And like, honestly watching, especially watching the Belvedere episode, like you're like, this is a rare gem.
She was not in that enough, in my opinion.
No, she wasn't.
They didn't give her enough stuff in that episode, but
it was sort of a side episode, right? So if you look there, it focuses just on as much on both of them in general. But yeah, that was a side episode for her. And the parts she's in the Belvedere episode, very, very funny. She has a small part in that where like she loves Belvedere and like they are really close to signing their divorce papers, right? They're going to court like that week. And she's the one kind of like hounding him to make sure he does it. And then she doesn't.
Ned.
Yeah. And then she doesn't show up to court. And it's because like Mr. Belvedere off screen has given her like a Mr. Belvedere talk about how like don't give up on love and like
there's a running thing where one by one every character in the show gets like a sit down at a kitchen table life advice talk from Mr. Belvedere,
like he used to do
he did on the show
in his old show with children,
which
basically.
They all receive very earnestly, grinning like children, so happy to get the advice and happy for his time and attention.
Greg Gurman's talks with Mr. Belvedere are so funny, and the way he like really plays up like his aw shucks, like acting like a child. It's very, very silly, but it's very, very funny.
Let's take a minute to talk about that pairing, like her sister and her sister's husband.
Yeah.
What are their characters' names again?
So it's Amanda and Eric, but they call him Rico.
Right.
Which is kind of wild.
Ned calls him Rico.
Right.
And
Only
I don't
Ned
think
calls him
Okay.
Rico.
I don't think it ever comes up.
They're
Why?
Yeah.
funny. Like her thing is like she does not suffer fools, and all of these people are fools, and she like
So
snaps
she's-
at all of them constantly.
She's the one that doesn't fall for the Belvedere thing and is trying to desperately like point out how absurd all of this
She's
is.
so mad that he's crashing at their house. She's like, "What are you talking about?"
He ends up crashing at her house.
Yeah. Why
Yeah.
is Mr. Belvedere in my home?
And he keeps getting in the way of everything, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
she's the only one who calls him by his name.
Yeah, she's the like sensible, rational person in the show, but she's constantly snapping at everyone else. But also, by this point, we find out that she's got like a muffin shop, and I was like, top of the muffin to you. But yeah, she's great. And then in the pilot, she sets up her husband as like, oh, he's an idiot, but he's like really sweet and loving.
Yeah,
And that remains consistent for the
Yeah.
whole series,
Yeah.
is that he's a very sweet, like loving,
Yeah.
like just happy to help out everyone with whatever sort of guy, but he's kind of an idiot.
yeah, yeah. He's an interesting. It's interesting that he's like Ned's best friend
Yeah.
because he is like such a counter to him, but he never like he just goes along with everything. You know, I've seen Greg Gurman in a lot of stuff, and I don't think I've ever seen him. He's usually kind of plays a bit of a jerk, so it's kind of weird to see him play so sweet and like
Yeah.
he's
This is
Yeah.
sort
Yeah.
of against type because he's very sweet, but not very savvy. And I think
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
kind of, you expect from him the
He-
person who'd be a lot
Yeah.
more like in charge of something. And like,
He's always
yeah.
like the successful businessman husband of somebody else in a sitcom. Like he's always like that guy who's kind of a straight man.
Yeah.
In a sitcom or a rom-com. Like he's always like that guy. He's
Yeah.
always that like finance bro who's like, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed the character dynamics greatly. I'm like disappointed that it's weird because like I have heard of this show and it was definitely like on my list of shows
Yeah.
I wanted us to eventually cover. So I was really glad, Barry, that you pushed for us to do it this week. And but the thing, like I was so surprised at especially how funny that episode was, and that it's not a show that people don't talk about more as
Yeah,
a hidden
yeah.
gem.
Yeah.
You know, like there's so many shows that, have a similar type of humor that have gotten canceled before their time that had a cult following. And this is not one of them.
Yeah.
no.
I think it's because it was like in the mid 90s that it couldn't pick up that cult following because there's no way to watch it, right? Like it wasn't one of those things where
Yeah.
it got on like DVD sales and then got this cult following. Like it just wasn't, it was in the wrong place
Mhm.
at the wrong time.
Yeah, and it ran for 46 episodes, so it never picked up a syndication deal, so it never
Yeah.
would have rerun or anything like that. Yeah, like I said, like I went back and watched a few more episodes of the first season, and like it's good, but I would say by episode 3, it's already firing really hard. Like episode 3 has a very funny Stacey episode where she starts dating this like kind of charming British guy, and like Ned's so on board with it and he's so supportive of it, and like she like is worried, like she really starts to like this guy, and she starts telling him about this marriage, and he's like, oh, you're married, and he's super like aroused by it, and like so she then has to pretend that she's in a really loving marriage with Ned, so this guy finds it hot.
God.
And it's really funny. Like there's all these scenes where like he's on the phone with her and like she's like pretending to be sneaking around, and like Ned's just in the room not caring.
Wow.
Yeah.
Then I might as well say the episode that I watched, the extra episode, the very basic premise is that Ned becomes quite obsessed with her parents and like
Oh my God.
hanging out with them and like making plans with them when she's not even around. And it turns out that like he didn't have a great relationship with his parents. and they think they are his actual in-laws.
Oh, so they're like not in on the
No,
scheme.
so this is episode 6.
Or at least at that point.
At this point, they're not in on the scheme. They think he's their new son-in-law. They want
like legitimate son-in-law.
Legitimate son-in-law.
Yeah.
They want to get to know him better, and he's thrilled to have parents who are like really like nice and like loving or whatever. Like you don't know too much detail, but I guess he didn't have a great relationship with his parents. So
yeah,
and she does not want this to be happening because she knows they're going to get a divorce soon, and she doesn't want her parents to like get attached and bond with him.
Yeah.
And so the whole episode is her trying to keep them apart. But there are moments where it actually reminded me a bit of like the Close Talker episode on Seinfeld. The whole thing, like you like spending time with the Seinfelds. And just so baffled by this. And he just like and it's a similar thing. Like he like gets them tickets to like a show and stuff like that. And
that's Judge Reinhold, right?
That's Judge Reinhold
on the Seinfeld
but
episode.
Like, this doesn't play as zany and hilarious as that. This plays a lot more like emotionally balanced.
Oh
but
man!
It's a pretty good premise to pull from a world where it's like, where are they going to go with this fake marriage setup? And that was a very decent plot line to pull from that by episode 6.
They get some good mileage.
Yeah, I mean, between what you just described and the whole Belvedere obsession, it seems like this character had some sort of like real neglect in his childhood, like emotional neglect in his childhood, that he needs these nurturing figures. Yeah. You know, like it's just like, not to overanalyze it like the way he overanalyzed Belvedere, but I'm like, oh, Tom, no wonder he's kind of like apolitical and amoral.
I think that's the implication. I actually. This might be the first time where I try to actually watch the whole show.
I think so too. I think I'm going to have to binge it.
Yeah, but it's interesting because as much as it is overanalyzing, like I think it's very in there. I think the writers very much intend for that to be in his character because like, despite him being so shitty, and maybe it is just Thomas Haden Church having like this, charisma, there always does seem to be a heart beating under the surface there.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you're right. Like he seeks out these things. And I was even asking like, why does he have this guy as his best friend? But he chooses to hang out with this sweet natured guy because he craves that kind of stuff. And it is really interesting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. There seems to be a running thing where even though his character is set up as a not very caring person and kind of a dickhead, you're right. He completely chooses to surround himself by like
with nicer people.
Nice, kind, compassionate people. Those are the only kind of people he wants to spend time with. So there's something interesting to it.
As the show goes on, like you really do, like Debra Messing gets to be very, very funny. Like her character gets a lot. Like I was just remembering this one line from the episode I was talking about where she's hooking up with the British guy and like he's like, oh, I guess it's been a while for you since you've had sex, right? And she's like, oh, no, why? What makes you say that? And he goes, well, you did scream, if you stop now, I'll kill you.
Wow. I know the Mr. Belvedere thing is like not the sort of format that they do for all the episodes, like having this celebrity in there sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But that episode felt like a proto extras, like the degree to which he was a self-deprecating version of a washed up Mr. Belvedere. And like to the point where he is truly like, like you said, unhinged. He does not make himself look good. Like it very much reminded me of an extras episode, like a Patrick Stewart one, or one of those.
That's a really good point.
Where it's like
or Daniel Radcliffe,
like just the worst version of that person playing
like
themselves.
Cartoonish, like bad version of that person.
It was like that.
Yeah, it was super funny. Like I loved when they were on set filming the commercial, and he's all. Like he says Belvedere. we both laughed.
I laughed so hard at that.
We both laughed at that.
And he gets so mad that like the sink is in the wrong position.
Yeah, he's all screwed up because he says like the sink is in the wrong position.
I think the sink was on that side, and then they're like,
because they try to recreate the Belvedere set.
And then they're like, what would it take? What would it take to move the sink? And they're like, carpenters and and all the time, and they're like losing a day of production. About $75,000, and Mr. Belvedere's just like, all right, and walks off set.
He just goes, "I'll see you tomorrow."
See you tomorrow. Like he just cost him $75,000.
Yeah, the Mr. Belvedere thing is so funny because just the idea that man wouldn't think he could play the role for years and not get the character name right.
Yeah,
it's so funny.
Yeah, and then he spit takes the can of cappuccino when he finally tastes it.
But he misses the sink because they moved the sink.
They moved it. Wasn't there a sink here? Yeah. It's across the board funny.
It's very
even
good.
Right down to the final payoff where it turns out that they canned him from the commercial and replaced him with Tony Danza. And you just hear the audio of it, but it pretty much definitely is Tony Danza doing the voice. It's just voiceover. Like you don't see him. They obviously just got him in a studio for 5 minutes to record this. But you're like, they're watching the TV and watching the commercial and you hear Tony Danza's voice doing the endorsement for the product.
Yeah, it's so good. And then Belvedere does like the what's it called? The oh god, I should know what this is called. The tag, I guess, at the end.
Oh, he's writing in his journal.
He's writing in his journal with voiceover like he used to do in the old Belvedere sitcom. And
oh god.
But it's on the recreated set as the carpenters and stuff are pulling the set apart.
The set pieces away.
And he's just like this sad guy sitting alone thinking he's still on a show. It's it's
gold. It's gold. And like, so I just, I applaud the writers for going there. Like whenever I see a show from that era, it's kind of like the John Larroquette show where the writing is like, not only funny, but it's just it's kind of like absurd and kind of like, they take some like really fun swings that, and maybe I don't know why I didn't think people had that kind of instinct back then, but they obviously did. Like obviously,
well, we know they had the instinct. It's more we didn't know that a network would let them do it. Allow them.
Would let them go that silly.
Yeah. I even like the little aside where so it's set up. We know that she's a journalist. So by midway through season 2, I was curious. So is she working as a journalist now that she's moved out of her parents' house and living in a downtown apartment? Well, she is. She's writing for the in-flight magazine for a discount airline. Like she got a journalist job.
No,
it's like
she's already. That's the funny thing, though. She like regresses because she works for the Village Voice.
At the beginning?
At the beginning of the
show.
Oh
my God.
Wow. So she's like backsliding into.
Yeah, because she approaches Belvedere to do like a profile. Yeah. And she's like, oh, we could be like Mr. Belvedere's like travel tips or something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is another great element of the show that makes me want to watch more of it, which is that like they are subverting some of the cliches of characters in New York City, whereas like the pilot is still peddling in cliches a bit. Episode 6 was still doing it a bit. But by this point in season 2, they are like fully flipping those things. So like they are the jobs that are so typical of TV shows and movies of the time. Like he works in advertising. She's a journalist. But they found the like silly versions of those things, not the like posh, glamorous versions of those things.
Maybe it's because they knew they weren't going to last. So they really went wild with everything. Like they really cranked up. I think there's something about, you know that your time is limited. So they just like did whatever the hell they wanted.
Maybe that's it because I haven't watched it, but I read the little premise of the last episode they did. And just by reading the like 2-sentence description, it's obvious they knew it was going to be their final episode because she gets her own rent controlled apartment and moves out and he quits his job at the ad agency. And even the title of the episode is like, good luck with your future endeavors or something like that. Like it's very obvious that they're just like wrapping it all up.
Yeah.
So I do kind of want to like see how it all plays out. But yeah, it's actually like a solid show.
Yeah, it was. So everybody out there, like whether you watch the show or not, you can look it up on the CTV app if you're in Canada, or figure out your own way if you're outside of Canada.
I mean, you have so much more access to things,
Yeah.
I assume
American
there's a
listeners,
way in the
so
US.
you'll figure it out. We're not going to help you.
My only real complaint about the show is the opening titles and font.
Oof.
Oh, that offensive 90s font. Yeah.
Especially
the titles or the opening credits,
both.
because
in season
Are they-
2, it's this silly recap of the premise.
oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Why,
oh, it's
Ned?
so bad.
Why, Stacey?
Yeah,
We
it's
got
so-
married so that we can with that stupid, it might
It's
as well be
so
Comic
bad.
Sans. Whatever that font is, it's just, ugh.
Yeah, it's really bad.
But you know what that is? Network notes. They're like, we need you to hammer home the premise before every single episode.
Yeah,
This
like
is-
no offense, but like the head creatives are very seldom involved in
Yeah.
the titling.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
here you are, like 30 some episodes deep into a show, and you do not have enough faith that the audience has even a vague idea of
Yeah.
the premise of the show, or that it matters so much. Like you're relying so much on that setup of like they're in this fake marriage that there's just no way that people will find this entertaining unless they know that exact perfect rundown of
Yeah,
like, here's
yeah.
what you're supposed to expect.
Yeah, it's a real Mr. Producer situation.
Yeah.
But honestly, other than that, it's a very
Yeah.
watchable show.
I mean, like, some of the writers involved are like top-notch people, including Charlie Kaufman. So this was one of the like TV
Oh, it's
projects.
this is one of Kaufman's.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes
so this
sense.
is one of the like sitcoms he worked on
I
before
wonder
he
if-
became Charlie Kaufman.
I wonder if he's responsible for the Belvedere concept.
No,
I don't believe he was.
It's another writer.
Okay.
I can't. Sorry, I don't have it ready. But yeah. So there's like lots of recognizable like TV writers that worked on like
Yeah,
big
and
shows.
if you look, they had a lot of great guest stars on it.
Yeah.
Like, I was really, when I was trying to pick my second episode, there was one that had Jason Bateman that I almost went for,
Oh,
Mm.
but I couldn't. I mean, when
You
I got
couldn't not do this one.
when I
Yeah.
got to this, I was like, oh my god, I have to watch this.
I saw that there are at least a couple episodes
Alex Trebek
with Alex
Yeah.
Trebek as a rival advertising guy.
Well,
And
that's
I'm like, I
funny.
need to see that.
Yeah. We're clearly gonna end up like
Because
Yeah.
Alex
watching it.
Trebek, of course, has a reputation on television of being very nice and very smart. And I feel like knowing what they did with Belvedere, I wonder if they make him like a real prick.
That'd be fun.
Maybe.
That'd be a lot
so
of fun.
funny. I have to know. Like if they do a self-deprecating version of him, that would be so funny. So, Brynn, tell us, how does this show connect with Friends?
Okay, so it connects with Friends a bunch of different ways. I sort of assumed going into this that through the cast members we'd have at least one degree connection. But
Mm.
of the 4 like main cast members, I actually didn't find a degree connection, but I found about three degree connections. So the first 2 are just through Thomas Haden Church. So of course Thomas Haden Church, who plays Ned, co-starred on Wings, as we've discussed, with Steven Weber. Steven Weber was part of the cast of Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, along with Matthew Perry. And then Matthew Perry played Chandler Bing on Friends.
Nice.
And then the second one is basically the same thing, except we're swapping Steven Weber for Tim Daly. So Tim Daly was one of the other main characters on Wings. Tim Daly went on to co-star in the rom-com Object of My Affection, which starred Jennifer Aniston. And Jennifer Aniston, of course, played Rachel Green on Friends. The next connection is through Nadia Dejani, who played Amanda Moyer on Ned and Stacey. So she co-starred on a short-lived sitcom, which might be a good show for us. It's called That's Life. And one of the other stars was Ron Livingston.
Ooh.
Ron, who I love. Ron Livingston was in Office Space, of course, with Jennifer Aniston. And then Jennifer Aniston played Rachel Green on Friends. And then there are two 1 Degree connections. First one is through Pamela Fryman, the iconic director. She directed episodes of both shows. And also Jill Condon, a writer for both Ned and Stacey and Friends.
There you go.
Sweet.
Yeah.
What about the spin-off?
Yeah, we'll spin it off. Yeah, so first and foremost, Michael J. Is it Wythorn? Wethern?
Yep.
Yeah, Wethern. Okay, so he continued to work in television and found a lot of success with the long-running series King of Queens. So that was his big project that he created after, which is kind of wild because it's definitely more of a formulaic sitcom. It's definitely more of a, it's not quite the same vibe as like Ned and Stacey. So it's interesting, but that was like his big, his big project. And then we have the 4 main cast members. Debra Messing had a couple of memorable episodes of Seinfeld shortly after her time on Ned and Stacey. And then in 1998, she kicked off her epic run as Grace Adler on Will and Grace. Since Will and Grace, she's starred in lots of other films and television shows, including, there's tons. Like, she was in a couple of Woody Allen flicks and, just like lots of bit parts here and there in rom-coms. She was in The Wedding Date. That was like her big turn. Yeah. As a rom-com star. I don't know how successful that movie was, but it was, I watched it.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah. And she was also in the NBC Broadway drama Smash and The Mysteries of Laura and lots of other things.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah. Thomas Hayden Church, following Ned and Stacey, appeared in lots of TV, but really made a splash as Jack in Alexander Payne's 2004 film Sideways, which we all love. He earned an Oscar nomination for that role.
Not drinking any fucking Merlot.
Well, that's
which I know is not his line.
It's not his line, but
when you mention that movie,
well, whenever we talk about Merlot or consider buying Merlot at the LCBO, where like one of us is always like, "I'm not drinking any fucking Merlot."
Yeah,
I like Merlot.
I mean, I do too. We actually like Merlot.
I think I remember reading that actually caused a considerable downturn in Merlot sales.
Oh my God.
Little small aside, Merlot was a very trendy wine in the 90s that people talked about.
Yeah.
And then that movie kind of like knocked it off a cliff. But like it was such a common reference.
That movie was sponsored by Big Pinot.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
Pinot. Yeah, it was all about Pinot.
My favorite Merlot reference though is in Seinfeld with George's parents meeting Susan's parents and having dinner. And when George's mom is like, Merlot? Never heard of it. Is it new?
Oh my God.
And they all just look at her with such disdain.
Anyway, let's get back to it. So Sideways was a big movie. It was like this like delightful kind of like indie movie, but it like kind of swept the Oscars that year and really kind of established Thomas Hayden Church as like a full-blown movie star. He went on to he appeared in the same year in the movie Spanglish in a supporting role. And then he got cast in Spider-Man 3, which was kind of wild, as the Sandman, and that which
he reprised earlier this year.
Yeah.
So okay,
so it's kind of funny to see him in like a big comic book movie. It's a random choice. And the most recent thing I saw him in, which I enjoyed, was the show Divorce with Sarah Jessica Parker. It was like the HBO
That's
show.
Right.
Yeah, and he's just an absolute delight. I think we're all like fans of his. Like he's a very fun person to watch on screen. Like
THC is very charming. Do you think I'm the first person to call him THC? Because those are great initials.
I guarantee you are not.
Yeah.
This show had great star initials. He's THC and she's DM.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Not bad. Okay, and then Greg Gurman, after this show, and even before this, like he kind of was already this guy who was just in everything. Like he's somebody who's like one of these like kind of comfort people that I'm like, oh, it's that guy. Like he's been in like 95% of the TV shows that I've seen growing up. So he was on the cast of Ally McBeal soon after this. He was also in the show.
That's what it was.
Yeah, Ally McBeal. He was also in House of Lies, NCIS, Once Upon a Time. He's been in movies like Friends with Money, which is one of my, like not like my favorite, but it's definitely one of those like great little indie movies. He's also in like Sweet November, and some other TV projects. Were the very underrated series Friends from College and Grey's Anatomy. He's got like a total of 119 IMDb credits. So the guy has never been out of work.
Yeah.
And then we have, of course, Nadia Dajani, who is another kind of recognizable face, like who I saw in a lot of things over the years. She's had a long and successful career as well, co-starring in show. She popped up in King of Queens later. She was in The West Wing, Sex and the City, and its spin-off, The Carrie Diaries. She was also in The Big C, most recently The Other Two. So I have to say for her, she's in a lot of New York-centric shows. So she kind of just like plays this like New Yorker over and over again, which is interesting. And fun fact, she is the co-founder of the Malaparte Theater Company with Ethan Hawke.
Hey.
Like she has like a long like friendship, and I think they dated as well. So like, she's
I wish I had a long friendship and dated Ethan Hawke.
I know, right? Don't we all? So yeah, she's kind of like a New York institution. And yeah, I just have to say, like, they're all four of them. They're just like top-notch people, and I would like watch them,
Yep. Agreed.
in anything. They're all great.
I will add a special thing is just saying that this was actually Christopher Hewitt's final performance.
Oh,
he died,
really?
He died a few years later. He hadn't really worked. Yeah, I looked at his IMDb. He hadn't really been working all that much through the 90s. But he passed away in 2001. And I think that this is an absolutely marvelous last performance.
I do too. I mean, good for him.
To parody yourself to this extreme level.
Yeah, to be such a good sport.
Yeah.
Oh, and obviously Charlie Kaufman was one of the writers who ended up becoming Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Well, unfortunately, Mr. Producer is still on his book tour, so I don't think he's going to be able to join us this week. So I guess now's as good a time as any to ask if anyone has any leftovers. Barry?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, first off, I guess Ned and Stacey is sort of...
Oh, that's weird. It's Mr. Producer calling. Hello, Mr. Producer?
Aaron!
Mr. Producer?
Aaron!
What's going on?
Nothing. I had a night off on the road. Jody's on his long-awaited date with Jane Patterson's assistant Maxwell, and I figured it was as good a time as any to check in.
Oh, well, that's very nice of you. Well, this week we were just chatting about Ned and...
Kid, I know. I read the group chat. I pay attention. Group chat's great, very funny GIF content. Or is it GIF?
The first one.
So first off, I gotta say, I love this show. The chemistry between the two leads was crackling. Just crackling.
Well, sure, they're good.
As a concept, it had a lot of legs, They hate each other, but do they? Maybe they like each other. Where did they come up with this stuff? Sort of like one of those, maybe they do, maybe they don't kind of things. I don't know. I'm sure you guys got a funny name for it.
We do.
The cop thing, it's a bit, pardon my expression, a bit of a loaded pierogi. But I think the newspaper stuff mostly works.
Newspaper?
I gotta say, very sad to hear about all that stuff with the college admissions and whatnot.
Wait. What are you talking about?
Now, what more can you say about Tony Danza that hasn't been said before? He officiated my third divorce,
Tony Danza?
He officiated your divorce? Like what? Like there's a ceremony? Helmer, you gotta treat your partners with respect, you punk, even if it don't work out. And hey, if Danza's got an opening in the schedule, you find a way to use them.
Okay, well, this is all fascinating, but I feel like you're talking about Hudson Street.
That's right. Great show. Not really.
We
No.
covered that show almost 2 months ago.
Oh, maybe I'm a bit behind on the group chat after all. What were you watching this time around?
Ned and Stacey.
Nope. Nothing. Well, pointless as always, Mr. P. Helmer, I swear to God.
Well, it was still great to hear your perspective on Hudson Street, even a little bit late.
It was great to talk to you guys anyway. I better get going. I'm pretty excited. I want to find out how the date went. Jody's been so excited. And my room service is here. The food here is incredible. I ordered, I just ordered this.
Until next time.
I was going to jump in and ask if it was pickles, but no.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah, it's always fun to hear from him.
Yeah, I guess.
I wonder how much left he has on this book tour.
Yeah, I can't imagine that many places really wanting to have him for speaking engagements, but whatever.
So, jumping back to where we were before that interruption, do we have any leftovers? I have a few.
I'm good.
I'm just gonna lightning round through a few quick comments. First of all, in the pilot, when they're making reference to how many people there are on Earth, and they're all 5 billion, and I'm like, it's up to well over 7 now. And this is one of these things that I hate, like the double-breasted suits. You see this in
Again with the
in
suits.
TV shows, in movies. It's still a thing to this day, even if it's a big budget show, even if it's like HBO. When characters drink red wine, it's this thin, watery liquid that looks like watered down cranberry juice and is absolutely not wine. And I can't stand it. And I had to mention that because we were talking about all the Merlot and Pinots and stuff like that. And I'm just like,
That's not as much as I hate people with coffee with coffee cups to go on TV and they're just empty. And you're just like, just put liquid in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Put something in it.
Yeah.
And although a genuine laugh I had in the pilot was that key and ring handoff where
that was funny.
She agrees to the fake marriage and she's going to be moving into his apartment. So he's like, here's the front door key. Here's the laundry room key. Here's your engagement ring. And then before she walks away, he's like, make sure you don't lose that laundry room key.
Because that's always a thing when you move in somewhere. It's there's always one key that is irreplaceable. It's don't lose the mail key. Don't lose the laundry room key. You just can't. You'll be screwed if you lose that.
Yeah.
In that same sentence, that same scene, I really liked his one line where he's like, well, you got to decide if you're going to marry me now because it's a long elevator ride up to my office and there are lots, and one of the women on it is going to be my next future wife.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, also, I wrote down that I never watched Mr. Belvedere really as a kid, but something about his voice and the way he speaks reminded me of Mr. Pitt. I just had to say that.
All right. Yeah, I'll just throw in one leftover. It's just the overall skepticism. We have to roll with the premise that they had to get married, but did they really actually have to get married? They could have just lied and said they got married. I know that he invited his boss to a wedding, but it didn't have to actually be a wedding. It could have, they could have or at the last minute, he could have been like, oh, sorry, we decided to do something really small and we couldn't invite, I don't know. But it just seemed odd that they actually got married instead of just lied about it.
I did like that instead of throwing an elaborate wedding, though, they do have a pretty shitty small wedding.
Yeah. They have a little wedding basically in the living room of Stacey's parents' house. So.
Yes. I like the idea that in the sitcom logic of it, like you said, they wanted to actually pull off a wedding and they had the parents there and the families and the friends and all these people and the boss is there so that he can see that there's this real wedding happening. But the parents are not skeptical of her marrying someone that they've never met before.
Anyway, now we're opening up a whole can of worms. I just want But yeah, we could, like, honestly talk about this show for a whole nother episode. Maybe one day we'll revisit it again because it was quite fun to watch.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. All right, bye.
That Was a Show is created and hosted by Brynn Byrne, Andrew Barry Helmer, and myself, Aaron Yeger. It's a production of Radio Gizmo in Toronto, Canada. Subscribe, rate, review, and share. Follow us on Instagram and tell your friends about it. That Was a Show?
Radio Gizmo.